The cathedral was breathtaking. 500 white roses lined the tall marble columns, and the afternoon sun poured through the stained glass windows, casting colorful light over the 450 guests. I stood at the altar in my $15,000 custom Vera Wang gown, looking into the eyes of the man I was about to spend forever with. Jackson Hayes looked devastating in his tailored black tuxedo, and something flickered behind his blue eyes that gave my stomach butterflies. Do you, Jackson Alexander Hayes, take Grace Elizabeth Morrison to be your lawfully wedded wife? Jackson's jaw tightened. His hands, which should have been steady, trembled slightly as he held mine. The silence stretched just a beat too long. Then another beat. Whispers began rippling through the congregation like a gathering storm. Jackson's voice cracked. He looked out at the crowd of Manhattan's elite. Surgeons, philanthropists, business moguls who'd known my family for generations. I can't do this. The collective gasp from 450 people sounded like a wave crashing against rocks. My maid of honor, Madison Pierce, stepped forward, her face a perfect mask of concern. Jackson, what's wrong? I kept my voice steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. He pulled his hands away from mine and turned to face our guests. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the cathedral, amplified by the perfect acoustics that had made this venue so expensive. I'm sorry, everyone. I know this is shocking, but I cannot in good conscience marry a woman who has been cheating on me and betraying every sick child in this city. The whispers exploded into shocked exclamations. Someone behind me gasped. What is he talking about? Jackson reached into his jacket and pulled out a remote control. Suddenly, the massive screens we'd installed for our wedding slideshow flickered to life, but instead of romantic photos, they displayed what looked like bank statements and financial documents. Ladies and gentlemen, Jackson announced, his voice growing stronger, more theatrical. The woman standing before you in that beautiful wedding dress is not only an adultress, but also a thief. Dr. Grace Morrison has been cheating on me while embezzling money from Children's Memorial Hospital. Money that was supposed to save the lives of pediatric cancer patients. The cathedral erupted. Shouts of disbelief. Gasps of horror. The sound of chairs scraping as people rose to their feet. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the screens showing bank records that appeared to show hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing from hospital accounts into what looked like my personal accounts. That's impossible, I whispered, but my voice was lost in the chaos. Madison stepped closer to the microphone, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Her voice shook with what sounded like genuine anguish. Grace, how could you? I've been covering for you for months hoping you'd come clean. The late nights you claimed were surgeries. They were secret meetings with your lover and offshore bankers. The charity donations you bragged about. You were stealing from the charity itself while having an affair behind Jackson's back. My legs nearly gave out. Madison, my best friend since medical school. My maid of honor. My roommate for 4 years who knew every secret, every fear, every dream I'd ever had. She was looking at me with such convincing heartbreak that for a split second, I almost believed I had done something wrong. Madison, what are you saying? My voice came out as barely a whisper. I'm saying, she sobbed into the microphone, that my best friend has been stealing money meant to buy chemotherapy drugs for dying children. Jackson found the evidence last week. I begged you to confess, to make this right, but you denied everything. The screens now showed what appeared to be email chains between fake offshore accounts and hospital systems. Jackson's mother, Eleanor Hayes, stood up in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. We had hoped Grace would do the right thing privately, but we couldn't let Jackson marry someone who steals from dying babies. The words hit like physical blows. Steals from dying babies. The accusation was so monstrous, so perfectly calculated to destroy not just my reputation but my soul, that I felt something crack inside my chest. But then I looked at Jackson's face. Really looked at it. And I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Behind the mask of righteous indignation, behind the performance of a heartbroken man doing his moral duty, I saw the smallest flicker of satisfaction. He was enjoying this. That's when I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a sad smile. It was the smile of a shark just about to strike its unsuspecting victim. Jackson, I said, my voice suddenly steady and clear enough to carry through the cathedral's perfect acoustics. Madison. I looked directly at both of them, my smile growing wider. You have absolutely no idea the harm you have just done to yourselves. Jackson's confident expression faltered just slightly. Madison's tears seemed to freeze on her cheeks. But you're about to find out. I reached into my bouquet and pulled out my own remote control. With one click, I took control of the giant screen and the sound audio system. Jackson's fabricated evidence vanished, and the screens flickered to life with a timestamp from 3 months ago. Security footage from Jackson's penthouse building, crystal clear and in full color. Jackson and Madison in the hallway, her pressed against the wall, his mouth on her neck, her legs wrapped around his waist like they couldn't wait another second to get to his bedroom. The collective gasp from 450 people sounded like a hurricane. Grace, stop this right now, Jackson hissed, reaching for my remote. You don't understand what you're doing. I stepped away from him smoothly. Oh, but I understand perfectly. Should we move on to audio evidence? I clicked again before he could answer. The screens now showed audio wave patterns while crystal clear voices filled the cathedral through the professional sound system. Jackson's voice filled the hall. The public humiliation is the only way this works. If I just break up with her, her family will ask questions. Eleanor, Jackson's mother's voice. And the embezzlement accusations will trigger Elizabeth Morrison's morality clause. Grace loses her $20 million inheritance. Jackson again. Madison's been rehearsing for weeks. She'll be devastated, heartbroken, torn between loyalty to her best friend and moral obligation to tell the truth. The audio continued playing their conspiracy in excruciating detail, while I watched my guests' faces transform from confusion to understanding to absolute fury. Madison's face went from flushed with fake tears to chalk white in seconds. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own bridesmaid dress. Grace, that's not. We can explain. Can you? I clicked again. Don't worry, you'll have a lot of explaining to do to my lawyers, the FBI and the DNA lab. I turned to look at the congregation, shock written all over their faces. 2 hours later, the man I almost married and my maid of honor were being led away by the FBI, and they were begging me to save them. Let me not get ahead of myself. Before we continue, if this is your first time in this channel, please subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing the different places this story reaches. And your support helps us bring more tales like this to you. Enjoy the ride. You need to understand something about me before this story makes sense. My name is Dr. Grace Elizabeth Morrison, and I'm not just any surgeon. I'm one of the youngest department heads in pediatric oncology at Children's Memorial Hospital. At 32, I was living my dreams, helping save more kids' lives, more than most doctors do in entire careers. But my dedication to healing children isn't just professional. It's personal. After my brother died due to leukemia, just 3 days before his 9th birthday, I decided that day, standing in his hospital room still wearing my school uniform, that I would dedicate my life to making sure other families didn't lose their little boys to cancer. Jackson Alexander Hayes. Up until that moment, the love of my life, everything I ever wanted in a man. God, even his name screams old money confidence. 6'2", the kind of devastating smile that made nurses blush and mothers approve instantly. An Ivy League MBA, heir to Hayes Development Corporation, a real estate empire that had been building Manhattan skylines for 3 generations. We met at a charity auction for Children's Memorial. How perfect, right? He bid $50,000 on a dinner with me, then told me he'd have paid twice that just for the chance to meet the brilliant doctor who's changing the world one kid at a time. Our first date lasted 14 hours. Dinner turned into late-night coffee, which turned into watching the sunrise from his penthouse balcony. He listened to my stories about Daniel with tears in his eyes, promised me he'd support my mission however he could. 3 months later, he was funding a new pediatric playroom at the hospital. 6 months after that, he proposed with my great-grandmother's ring during a surprise visit to the children's ward, getting down on one knee surrounded by kids in superhero pajamas who cheered like we were their favorite movie. For 2 years, Jackson Hayes was everything I thought I wanted. Supportive, generous, passionate about my work. His family welcomed me like the daughter they never had. His mother Eleanor started inviting me to her charity committees. His father Robert offered to mentor me in managing wealth responsibly once we were married. They made me feel like I belonged in their world of old money elegance and philanthropic power. But perfect men don't exist, and I should have known Jackson was too good to be true. Madison Pierce. My medical school roommate, my maid of honor, my closest friend for over a decade. If Jackson was the betrayal that broke my heart, Madison was the betrayal that shattered my soul. We'd been through everything together. The hell of medical school, residency hazing that nearly broke us both. The celebration when we both matched into competitive programs. When she decided to leave medicine for pharmaceutical sales, I supported her completely. When she got her dream job at Ascendia Pharmaceuticals making twice what I earned as a resident, I celebrated with champagne and genuine joy. Madison was the sister I never had. She knew about my worst fears, my biggest dreams, my most embarrassing moments. She held my hair when I was sick, covered for me when I needed extra time for exams, and was the only person other than family who knew the real story about Daniel and why saving kids mattered so much to me. She also knew every detail about my relationship with Jackson, including things I probably shouldn't have shared with anyone. Like how Jackson sometimes seemed nervous about money despite his family's wealth. How he'd started working late more often, taking mysterious phone calls, getting strange mail he wouldn't discuss. Madison was the one who convinced me I was being paranoid, that rich people just handled business differently than the rest of us. What I didn't know was that Madison had been secretly meeting with Jackson for months, that she was 4 months pregnant with his baby, and that she'd been feeding him inside information about my finances, my family, and my deepest vulnerabilities to help him plan this perfect public assassination of my character. But the betrayal ran even deeper than Jackson and Madison. This was a family operation. My cousin Tyler Morrison worked for my family's investment firm Morrison & Associates, the company that had managed our family wealth for 3 generations. Tyler had access to all my financial records, knew about my inheritance, understood exactly how my grandmother's will was structured. Most importantly, he knew about the morality clause. My grandmother, Elizabeth Morrison, built our family fortune from nothing through real estate investments and an iron will. She also had very strict ideas about character and integrity. Her will specified that any family member involved in criminal activity, moral turpitude, or public scandal would forfeit their inheritance, which would instead go to charity. My portion? $20 million. Tyler had been feeding Jackson information for months, helping him understand exactly how to structure accusations that would trigger the morality clause and cost me everything. In exchange, Jackson had promised Tyler a percentage of my inheritance once I was disinherited, and he was free to marry Madison. Even Jackson's parents were involved. Eleanor and Robert Hayes weren't just disappointed future in-laws doing their moral duty. They were co-conspirators desperately trying to save their own financial skins. The Hayes real estate empire was crumbling, hemorrhaging money from Jackson's terrible investment decisions and gambling debts. They needed my family money to stay afloat, but they also needed a way to access it without Jackson actually having to stay married to me long-term. Their plan was perfect in its cruelty. Destroy me publicly so I'd lose my inheritance, keep the engagement gifts and wedding deposits my family had already paid, then have Jackson marry pregnant Madison within months as the supportive partner helping her through this difficult time after losing her best friend to scandal. But here's what none of them knew, what they couldn't have known because they underestimated me completely. I'd been watching them very closely. I knew about Madison's pregnancy. I knew about Tyler's betrayal. I knew about the Hayes family's financial problems. I knew about Jackson's gambling addiction and his mounting debts to some very dangerous people. And I had evidence. Lots and lots of evidence. Standing at that altar, watching their perfectly orchestrated performance, I felt something that surprised me. Not heartbreak, not devastation, not the crushing humiliation they expected. I felt powerful, because in trying to destroy me, they'd made one critical error. They assumed that because I was kind, I was weak. Because I was trusting, I was stupid. Because I dedicated my life to helping others, I wouldn't know how to fight back when someone tried to hurt me. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The discovery. 7 days before my wedding, I was living in a beautiful lie. I woke up that Tuesday morning in Jackson's penthouse, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Jackson had already left for an early morning meeting, something that had become increasingly common over the past few months. Madison was coming over at 10 to finalize seating arrangements, and I was actually excited about it. My best friend and my fiancé's attention to our wedding details felt like proof that I was loved, supported, cherished. God, I was so naive. I was in Jackson's master bathroom when I saw it. A small pink and white box in the pristine trash can that Jackson's housekeeper had somehow missed. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out. Clear blue digital pregnancy test. The box was empty, but the receipt was still folded inside. Purchased 3 days ago at the CVS 6 blocks away. The same CVS where Madison always stopped for coffee on her way to visit me. I sat on that cold marble floor staring at the box, my mind racing through possibilities that I didn't want to believe. Maybe it belonged to Jackson's housekeeper. Maybe Madison had bought it for a friend. Maybe there was some innocent explanation that didn't involve my best friend being pregnant with my fiancé's baby. But deep down I knew. The way they'd been acting lately, Madison's sudden aversion to wine at dinners, Jackson's mysterious phone calls, the way they both seemed to have private jokes I wasn't part of. All those little moments I'd dismissed as wedding stress suddenly clicked into place like pieces of a horrible puzzle. I was still sitting there, holding that empty box, when I heard Jackson's voice coming from his home office down the hall. He was supposed to be at his meeting, but apparently he'd come back. And he wasn't alone. Has to be next week, Mother. The wedding is Saturday, and we can't wait any longer. I crept closer to the office door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. Through the crack, I could see Jackson pacing behind his massive desk while his mother Eleanor sat in the leather chair across from him, her perfectly coiffed silver hair catching the morning light. Jackson, darling, are you absolutely certain this is the only way? Eleanor's voice carried that upper-class concern that made her sound caring while being utterly ruthless. Grace is such a sweet girl. Surely there's a gentler method to. A gentler method to what, Mother? Break up with her quietly and lose access to her family's money? Madison is 4 months pregnant. 4 months. She's already starting to show. And people are going to start doing math soon. Jackson's voice was sharp with panic I'd never heard before. My blood turned to ice. 4 months pregnant. I counted backwards in my head, and my stomach dropped into my feet. 4 months ago, I had been in the hospital myself. 4 months ago, I had miscarried Jackson's baby. It was early, only 8 weeks. And I hadn't told anyone except Madison. I'd been planning to surprise Jackson with the news. But then I started bleeding during a surgery and everything went wrong so fast. Madison held my hand in the emergency room while doctors confirmed what I already knew. She bought me ice cream and bad movies and promised me that Jackson and I would have other chances. That this wasn't the end of our family dreams. While I was grieving our lost baby, Jackson was making a new one with my best friend. The public humiliation is the only way this works, Jackson continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident. If I just break up with her, her family will ask questions. Her grandmother might even cut me out of her will entirely out of spite. But if Grace is publicly disgraced, caught in a scandal that makes her look like a criminal, then I'm the victim. The nobleman who was deceived by his corrupt fiancée. Eleanor nodded approvingly. And the embezzlement accusations will trigger Elizabeth Morrison's morality clause. Grace loses her $20 million inheritance, which goes to charity instead of potentially coming back to haunt us in a divorce settlement later. Exactly. Plus, Madison's pregnancy gives me the perfect reason to move on quickly. I'm not a heartless man abandoning his fiancée. I'm a responsible man supporting the mother of my child after being betrayed by the woman he trusted most. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't even just a pregnancy scandal. This was a carefully orchestrated destruction of my entire life. What about the evidence Tyler provided? Eleanor asked. You're certain it will be convincing? Jackson laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Tyler outdid himself. The bank records look completely authentic. The forged signatures on the offshore accounts are perfect copies of Grace's handwriting. Even I almost believed it when I saw the final documents. And Madison is prepared for her role? Madison's been rehearsing for weeks. She'll be devastated, heartbroken, torn between loyalty to her best friend and moral obligation to tell the truth. The pharmaceutical angle is brilliant too. She'll claim Grace was stealing drugs to sell on the black market in addition to the financial embezzlement. I felt like I was drowning. Not only were they planning to accuse me of financial crimes, but drug trafficking too. As a doctor, those accusations would destroy my medical license instantly, even if they were eventually proven false. Saturday will be perfect, Eleanor said with satisfaction. 450 witnesses, including half of Manhattan's medical and social elite. By Sunday morning, Grace Morrison will be the most hated woman in New York. And by Monday, she'll be in police custody, Jackson added. Tyler made sure the evidence trail will be convincing enough for criminal charges, not just civil ones. They were planning to have me arrested. At my own wedding. In front of everyone I'd ever loved or respected. I backed away from the door on shaking legs, and somehow made it to the guest bathroom before I threw up. When the heaving stopped, I sat on the cold tile floor and stared at my reflection in the mirror across from me. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman whose world had just exploded. But then something shifted inside me. The shock began crystallizing into something harder, colder, more focused. They thought they were so clever, so thorough in their planning. They thought I was weak, naive, trusting little Grace who would crumble under their attack. I pulled out my phone and made a call to someone I'd never thought I'd need. Davidson Investigations? This is Dr. Grace Morrison. I need to hire your best team, and I need them to start today. I have 1 week to build a case against people who are trying to destroy my life. When Marcus Davidson heard what I suspected, he quoted me a price that was equivalent to a king's ransom. I didn't hesitate. Whatever it costs. I want everything. Financial records, surveillance footage, phone records, background checks, forensic accounting. Everything. Dr. Morrison, that's a lot to accomplish in 7 days. Then you better get started. Over the next 6 days, I lived a double life that would have impressed any spy. During the day, I played the happy bride-to-be. I smiled at rehearsal dinners, laughed at bachelor party toasts, hugged Madison when she cried about how emotional she was about my big day. I let Jackson hold my hand during our final meeting with the wedding planner, nodded when he suggested we should start fresh, with our finances after the honeymoon. At night, I met with private investigators in parking garages and 24-hour diners, reviewing evidence that painted a picture of betrayal so systematic it took my breath away. Bank records showing Jackson's crushing gambling debts. Hotel receipts documenting his affair with Madison going back 8 months. Medical records confirming her pregnancy timeline. Phone records showing hundreds of calls between Jackson, Madison, and Tyler plotting my downfall. The most damning evidence came from Marcus's surveillance team. They'd bugged Jackson's office and captured hours of conversations planning my humiliation. They'd followed Madison to prenatal appointments and photographed her leaving with ultrasound images. They'd documented Tyler accessing my family's financial systems and creating the forged documents that were supposed to send me to prison. By Friday night, I had enough evidence to destroy all 3 of them 10 times over. I also had a plan. Saturday morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, according to tradition. Madison was already there, fluttering around with coffee and pastries, playing the perfect maid of honor right up until the moment she planned to stab me in the back. "Grace, you look so calm," she said, studying my face in the mirror as my stylist worked on my hair. "Aren't you nervous?" I met her eyes in the reflection and smiled. "Oh, Madison, I've never been more ready for anything in my life." She had no idea how true that was. I clicked my remote, and Jackson's fabricated evidence vanished from the screens. For a split second, there was silence so complete you could hear the cathedral's ancient stones settling. Then my own presentation began. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying through the cathedral's sound system with crystal clarity. "Before we continue with this fascinating performance, I think you deserve to see the real evidence." That was when the screens flickered to life with a timestamp from 3 months ago. Security footage from Jackson's penthouse building, crystal clear and in full color. Jackson and Madison in the elevator, her pressed against the wall, his mouth on her neck, her legs wrapped around his waist like they couldn't wait another second to get to his apartment. The collective gasp from 450 people sounded like a hurricane. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted from the back. Madison's face went from flushed with fake tears to chalk white in seconds. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own bridesmaid dress. "Grace, that's not. We can explain. Can you?" I clicked again. New footage appeared, Madison leaving Jackson's building at 6 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes, doing the obvious walk of shame. The timestamp showed it was from 2 months ago. Then another clip from 6 weeks ago. Then another from 3 weeks ago. "This affair has been going on for 8 months, I announced calmly while the footage played on a continuous loop. "Including the night I miscarried our baby Jackson. Remember that night? When I was in the hospital bleeding out our child, and you said you were too sick to come see me? Turns out you were just too busy screwing my best friend. The cathedral erupted. Shouts of outrage, gasps of horror, the sound of chairs scraping as people jumped to their feet. Jackson's face had gone from confident to panicked to murderous in the span of 30 seconds. "Grace, stop this right now," he hissed, reaching for my remote. "You don't understand what you're doing." I stepped away from him smoothly. "Oh, but I understand perfectly. Should we move on to audio evidence?" I clicked again before he could answer. The screens now showed audio wave patterns while crystal-clear voices filled the cathedral through the professional sound system. Audio recording of Jackson and his mother planning my public humiliation, and how Madison had been preparing for weeks. The audio continued playing their conspiracy in excruciating detail, while I watched my guests' faces transform from confusion to understanding to absolute fury. My father looked like he wanted to commit murder. My mother was crying, but not from sadness, from rage. My brother Marcus had actually started moving toward the altar with violence in his eyes before my uncle grabbed his arm. "You recorded us?" Jackson's voice cracked like he was going through puberty again. "That's illegal. You can't use that." "Actually," I said pleasantly, "recording conversations in your own home is perfectly legal in New York. Especially when you're gathering evidence of criminal conspiracy." I looked out at our guests. Did everyone catch the part where they planned to have me arrested on drug trafficking charges? Using evidence my own cousin Tyler forged? Tyler Morrison, standing in the groomsman line, went so pale I thought he might faint. He started backing away from the altar, but my brother-in-law James stepped behind him, blocking his exit. Tyler was trapped. "Grace, please." Madison finally found her voice, but it came out as a broken whisper. "I'm pregnant. You can't do this to me. Think about the baby." "You mean the baby you conceived while I was grieving my miscarriage?" My voice stayed steady, but ice crept into every word. "The baby you've been using as leverage in your conspiracy to destroy my life? That baby." I clicked the remote again. Medical records appeared on screen. Madison's prenatal appointments, her ultrasound images, her due date calculations. "For months pregnant," I announced. "Conceived in January. The same month I lost my baby. The same month you held my hand in the hospital and promised me everything would be okay. The same month you started planning my destruction." Madison collapsed into the nearest chair, sobbing hysterically. But these weren't the practiced tears from her earlier performance. These were the messy, desperate sobs of someone whose world was ending in real time. "But wait," I said brightly like I was hosting a game show. "There's more." The screen switched to bank records. Jackson's bank records. Page after page of devastating financial information scrolled past our guests' shocked eyes. "Jackson Alexander Hayes," I announced like I was reading an indictment. "Heir to the Hayes development fortune, Harvard MBA, successful real estate developer, is actually $5 million in debt." The numbers on screen told the whole story. Massive gambling losses at underground poker games. Loans from private lenders at crushing interest rates. Credit cards maxed out to pay minimum balances on other credit cards. A financial house of cards that had been collapsing for 2 years. The Hayes family real estate empire? I continued conversationally. Mortgaged to the hilt. His parents remortgaged their estate 6 months ago just to make payroll. The company has exactly 17 days of operating capital left. Eleanor Hayes shot to her feet like she'd been electrocuted. "This is private information. How did you get private financial records?" "The same way you got mine to create your fake evidence," I replied sweetly. Forensic accountants are remarkably thorough when they're properly motivated. Robert Hayes, Jackson's father, was tugging on his wife's arm, trying to get her to sit down and stop drawing attention to themselves. But it was too late. Everyone was staring at them now, understanding dawning on face after face throughout the cathedral. "So let me make sure everyone understands the situation," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Jackson needed money desperately. He knew about my inheritance, my family's wealth, my anonymous donations to the hospital. He also knew about my grandmother's morality clause. So he hatched a plan. I clicked through more evidence as I spoke. Phone records showing hundreds of calls between Jackson, Madison, and Tyler. Email chains discussing forged documents. Text messages about timing the public accusations for maximum damage. Seduce me, get engaged, get access to my family money, then destroy my reputation so completely that I'd lose my inheritance, and he could move on to marry his pregnant mistress without looking like the villain. Jackson was sweating now, actual beads of perspiration visible on his forehead under the cathedral's dramatic lighting. His hands were shaking as he kept reaching for my remote, but I danced away from him each time. The genius part, I continued, was using my own kindness against me. They knew I'd donated my inheritance anonymously to the children's hospital, so they fabricated evidence showing me stealing from the same institution I'd actually funded. Poetic, really. Grace, you have to stop, Jackson pleaded, his voice breaking. People don't understand. The gambling, the debts, it's not what it looks like. I was trying to make money for us, for our future. Our future. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. Jackson, there is no us. There hasn't been us for months. There's been you, Madison, your criminal family, and my traitor cousin plotting to destroy my life. I clicked the remote one final time. The screens now showed a split image. On the left, Jackson's gambling debts to some very dangerous-looking people. On the right, Madison's medical record showing this wasn't her first pregnancy by Jackson. Madison had an abortion 8 months ago, I announced. Also Jackson's baby. Apparently, she's been juggling multiple pregnancies while planning my downfall. Makes you wonder about the timeline, doesn't it? Madison let out a sound like a wounded animal. Jackson looked like he'd been hit by a truck. But I wasn't finished with them yet. The cathedral doors opened with a heavy creak that echoed through the sudden silence. Detective Ray Sullivan walked down the center aisle with 4 uniformed officers behind him, their footsteps perfectly synchronized and ominous. Jackson Alexander Hayes, Detective Sullivan called out in a voice that commanded attention. Madison Pierce. Tyler Morrison. You're all under arrest. The 3 of them looked at each other in pure panic. Tyler actually tried to run, pushing past the other groomsmen and heading for the side door. He made it maybe 10 feet before 2 officers tackled him to the marble floor, right in front of my great-aunt's pew. She looked down at him with disgust and moved her purse so he couldn't reach it. Jackson was backing away from the altar now, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. This is insane. Grace, call them off. Whatever you think you know, we can work this out. Work it out. I stepped toward him, and for the first time since I'd known him, Jackson Hayes looked afraid of me. You mean like we worked out your gambling debts? Or like we worked out your affair? Or like we worked out your plan to have me arrested on felony charges? Madison was hyperventilating now, her hands pressed against her stomach in a gesture that was probably meant to look protective, but just looked desperate. The baby, Grace. Think about the baby. You can't let them arrest a pregnant woman. I'm not letting them do anything, I replied calmly. I'm just giving them evidence of the crimes you committed. What they do with that evidence is their choice. Detective Sullivan was reading Jackson his rights while 2 officers handcuffed him. Jackson's eyes never left mine, and I saw the exact moment he realized that this wasn't just humiliation. This was the complete destruction of everything he'd built his identity around. You destroyed us, he said, his voice hollow with shock. I smiled. The same smile I'd given him when this all started. No, Jackson. You destroyed yourselves. I just made sure everyone got to watch. As the officers led Jackson away in handcuffs, I held up my hand to stop them at the altar steps. Actually, Detective Sullivan, before you take them away, I think our guests deserve to know the full extent of their crimes. The detective paused, understanding immediately. This wasn't just about justice. This was about making sure these people could never hurt anyone again through lies and manipulation. I clicked my remote one more time. New financial documents flooded the screens, but these weren't Jackson's gambling debts. These were from Morrison and Associates, my family's investment firm. Tyler Morrison. I called out to my cousin, who was now handcuffed and being held upright by 2 officers. Would you like to tell everyone how much you've stolen from our family's charitable foundation? Or should I? Tyler's face, already pale from being tackled, went completely gray. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. $500,000, I announced to the cathedral. Over the past 18 months, Tyler has been systematically embezzling from the Morrison Family Foundation, the charity that funds scholarships for underprivileged children to attend medical school. My father shot to his feet like he'd been launched from a cannon. 500,000? His voice echoed off the stone walls with a rage I'd never heard before. Tyler, you stole from children trying to become doctors? The screen showed bank records, forged signatures, fake invoices. all bearing Tyler's digital fingerprints. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. The stolen money wasn't just for Tyler's personal use, I continued, watching my extended family's faces transform with horror and fury. It was payment for his services in this conspiracy. Jackson promised Tyler 20% of my inheritance once I was disinherited. That's $4 million, Tyler. Was it worth it? Tyler finally found his voice, but it came out as a broken whisper. Grace, please. I'm family. I was desperate. My wife's medical bills, the kids' college funds. You're not family anymore, my father said coldly. Family doesn't steal from sick children to fund conspiracies against their own blood. But I wasn't done with Tyler yet. I clicked again, and the screen showed something that made several people gasp out loud. Surveillance footage from our family office building showing Tyler accessing secure financial systems after hours, photographing documents, making copies of private family records. Tyler provided Jackson's family with every detail of our finances, I explained. My trust fund structure, my grandmother's will, the exact wording of the morality clause. He even gave them samples of my handwriting, so they could forge my signature on fake offshore accounts. I looked directly at Tyler, who was now openly crying. You sold out everything our family built, Tyler. 4 generations of Morrison family legacy. And you threw it away for money to help destroy the one person in this family who actually uses her wealth to help others. Eleanor Hayes had been trying to make herself invisible in the front pew, but I wasn't going to let her escape that easily. But Tyler had help, didn't he? I turned toward Eleanor with a smile that made her flinch. Eleanor Hayes, my respected mentor, the woman who guided me through my early career, who taught me about managing wealth responsibly. Tell everyone, Eleanor. When did you decide to use the insider information I shared with you to help destroy me? Eleanor's composure finally cracked completely. Grace, you don't understand. Jackson was desperate. The family business, our reputation, everything was at stake. So you decided to save it by destroying an innocent person? My voice cut through her excuses like a scalpel. You used the private information I shared with you during our mentoring sessions to help craft the perfect accusations against me. The screens now showed email chains between Eleanor and Tyler, discussing every detail of my personal life, my finances, my vulnerabilities. Private conversations I'd had with Eleanor about my brother Daniel's death, my dedication to helping children, my anonymous donations, all of it weaponized against me. You knew exactly which accusations would hurt me most. I continued, my voice steady but my eyes blazing. Stealing from children. Because you knew that was literally the opposite of everything I believe in. You took my deepest pain and turned it into the knife you wanted to twist in my back. Eleanor was crying now, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. We never meant for it to go this far. We just needed access to your family money to save our business. By having me arrested on felony charges. I snapped, my composure cracking just enough to let real anger show through. Your plan didn't end with humiliation, Eleanor. You wanted me in prison. But the most devastating revelation was still coming. I took a deep breath and clicked my remote one final time. Now about Madison's pregnancy, I said, my voice returning to that dangerously calm tone. Madison, would you like to tell everyone the real timeline? Or should I? Madison looked up from her chair where she'd been sobbing. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like black tears. Grace, please don't do this. I'm begging you. You mean like you begged me not to work late shifts so you'd have less opportunity to sleep with my fiancé? Oh wait, you actually encouraged me to work more hours. Silly me. I gestured to the screens, which now showed detailed medical records. Madison Pierce is actually 5 months pregnant, not 4 like they claimed. 5 months means conception in October. Want to know what happened in October? I didn't wait for an answer. In October, I was selected to present my research at the International Pediatric Oncology Conference in Geneva, the biggest honor of my career. Madison insisted I go, said it was too important to miss. She even offered to keep Jackson company while I was away for 2 weeks. The cathedral was dead silent except for the sound of Madison's increasingly desperate sobs. Guess what happened during those 2 weeks? I clicked through hotel records, restaurant receipts, even social media posts that Madison had been stupid enough to share. Jackson and Madison played house in my apartment. They ordered takeout from my favorite restaurants, slept in my bed, even used my Netflix account to watch romantic movies. Several people in the congregation made sounds of disgust. Using someone's Netflix account somehow felt almost as violating as the affair itself. But here's the really sick part, I continued, my voice getting stronger with righteous fury. This wasn't Madison's first pregnancy by Jackson. She had an abortion in August, also Jackson's baby. When she got pregnant again in October, she decided this one would be her ticket to my life. Madison's head snapped up. That's not true. I loved him. I still love him. You loved my life, I corrected. My family's money, my social connections, my apartment, my future. Jackson was just the vehicle to get all of that. I clicked again, showing text messages between Madison and Jackson that laid out their entire timeline. Madison to Jackson, November 15th. Grace suspects nothing. Keep playing the devoted fiancé until after the wedding deposits are paid. Jackson to Madison, December 3rd. Mom thinks we should wait until after New Year's to execute the plan. Gives us more time to perfect the evidence. Madison to Jackson, December 20th. I'm already showing. We need to move faster. What if someone notices at the wedding? Jackson to Madison, January 8th. Don't worry. After Saturday, Grace will be too busy dealing with criminal charges to worry about your pregnancy. We can announce our engagement by Valentine's Day. The messages kept scrolling, each one more damning than the last. Plans to keep my engagement ring. Plans to stay in my apartment until they could afford something better. Plans to use my wedding vendors for their own ceremony since everything was already paid for. They weren't just planning to destroy my reputation, I told the stunned congregation. They were planning to steal my entire life. My home, my belongings, even my wedding vendors. Madison was going to wear my backup wedding dress to marry Jackson at the venue I'd already paid for. Madison let out a wail of anguish that echoed through the cathedral like a wounded animal. But I had one more revelation that would destroy any remaining sympathy anyone might have had for her. Oh, and about those pharmaceutical samples Madison has access to through her job? I clicked to medical records and police reports. She's been stealing controlled substances for months. Opioids, benzos, stimulants. Some for personal use, some to sell, and some to slip into drinks when she needed to gather information from people who might expose her schemes. The congregation exploded in shocked exclamations. Drug theft was bad enough, but drugging people without consent was an entirely different level of criminal behavior. Detective Sullivan stepped forward. Ma'am, are you saying Ms. Pierce has been drugging people? I'm saying Madison Pierce has been operating a one-woman pharmaceutical crime ring, while planning to destroy my life and steal my identity. I looked directly at Madison, who had gone from sobbing to hyperventilating. How many people did you drug, Madison? How many times did you slip something into someone's drink to make them more compliant, more talkative, more vulnerable? Madison couldn't answer because she was too busy having what looked like a panic attack. But her silence was answer enough. Jackson, still in handcuffs, finally found his voice again. Grace, you've made your point. Everyone knows what we did. Can't we work out some kind of deal? For the baby's sake. I looked at him with genuine curiosity. A deal? Jackson, you were planning to have me arrested on felony charges. You were going to let me go to prison for crimes I didn't commit while you married my best friend and spent my family's money. What kind of deal did you think we might work out? He opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently realizing that there was absolutely nothing he could say that would make any of this better. Besides, I added with that same sharp smile, I'm not done yet. The cathedral doors burst open with a sound like thunder. But this time, it wasn't just Detective Sullivan and his local officers. Federal agents in dark suits streamed down the center aisle like an invasion force, their badges glinting under the stained glass light. FBI. Agent Alex Parrish announced, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone freeze instantly. Nobody moves. This is now a federal crime scene. Jackson's face went from pale to green. Federal? Grace, what did you do? What did I do? I laughed, and it was the first genuinely happy sound I'd made all day. Jackson, when you decided to frame me for embezzling from a hospital that receives federal funding, you made this a federal case. Wire fraud across state lines, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, money laundering through fake offshore accounts. Congratulations, you just earned yourself a 20-year federal prison sentence instead of a few years in state prison. Agent Parrish approached the altar with papers in her hand. Jackson Alexander Hayes, You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO Act." "RICO?" Jackson's voice cracked like a teenager. "That's for organized crime." "This is organized crime," Agent Parrish replied coolly. "A criminal enterprise involving multiple family members, forged documents, stolen funds, and a conspiracy spanning multiple states. Textbook RICO case." But the biggest shock was yet to come. Agent Parrish turned to address the congregation, and her next words made everyone gasp in unison. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Grace Morrison has been working with federal law enforcement for the past 6 months as part of an ongoing investigation into financial crimes targeting charitable organizations across the tri-state area." The cathedral erupted. 6 months. I had been working with the FBI for 6 months, which meant Dr. Morrison, Agent Parrish continued, has been instrumental in documenting this criminal enterprise and gathering evidence that has led to arrests in 3 states. The evidence gathered through her cooperation has exposed a network of individuals using romantic relationships to gain access to charitable funds and wealthy families. Jackson stared at me like I was a complete stranger. 6 months? Grace, we were planning the wedding 6 months ago. You were still sleeping in my bed, eating breakfast with my family, acting like everything was normal. I was gathering evidence, I said simply. And until 1 week ago, I never knew I'll be gathering evidence against people I trusted and called family. Eleanor Hayes finally understood the scope of what was happening. You recorded us. In our own home. Our private family conversations. With FBI authorization, Agent Parrish confirmed. Dr. Morrison was equipped with recording devices and given specific instructions on how to gather evidence without compromising the investigation. Madison, who had been quietly hyperventilating in her chair, suddenly found her voice again. That's entrapment. She tricked us. Entrapment requires law enforcement to induce someone to commit crimes they wouldn't normally commit. Agent Parrish explained patiently. You had already committed most of these crimes before Dr. Morrison ever contacted us. She just documented the ongoing criminal enterprise. Agent Parrish gestured to her team, and suddenly federal agents were everywhere, placing people in handcuffs with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed operation. Jackson's parents had apparently decided they'd heard enough. I watched Eleanor and Robert Hayes quietly stand up and start moving toward the side exit, trying to blend in with other guests who were shifting nervously in their seats. They almost made it. Robert and Eleanor Hayes, Agent Parrish called out loudly. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Robert grabbed Eleanor's arm and they broke into a run, pushing past shocked wedding guests toward the cathedral's side door. They probably would have made it too, except I had anticipated this possibility. Cathedral security guards, the ones I had specially hired for today, stepped out to block their path. But these weren't regular event security guards. These were off-duty federal marshals who owed Agent Parrish some favors. Eleanor screamed as the marshals took her down gently but firmly right in front of the Morrison family pew. My grandmother, all 93 years of her, looked down at Eleanor with the kind of disdain usually reserved for people who cheat at bridge. Pathetic, Grandmother Morrison said loudly enough for everyone to hear. In my day, criminals at least had the dignity to face their consequences with some class. Robert Hayes didn't resist once he saw his wife in handcuffs. He just stood there looking defeated while they cuffed him too. The charges against Robert and Eleanor Hayes, Agent Parrish announced, include conspiracy, accessory to wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. They face the same federal penalties as their son. Tyler was already in handcuffs from his earlier tackle, but now federal agents were reading him additional charges. Tyler Morrison, you're also under arrest for embezzlement of federal funds, wire fraud, and violation of fiduciary duty. The Morrison Family Foundation receives federal matching grants, which makes your theft a federal crime. As the agents led Tyler past me, he looked up with tears streaming down his face. Grace, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My kids, my wife. What's going to happen to my family? I looked down at him without an ounce of sympathy. You should have thought about that before you stole from children trying to become doctors, Tyler. Your family will survive. The kids whose scholarships you stole might not get the same chance. Madison was last. As the federal agents approached her, she tried one final manipulation. Grace, please. We were best friends for 10 years. That has to count for something. I made mistakes, but I'm pregnant. Think about the baby. I knelt down so I was at eye level with her chair. When I spoke, my voice was quiet enough that only she could hear me. Madison, you drugged innocent people. You stole controlled substances from your employer. You helped plan to destroy my life and send me to prison for crimes I didn't commit. And you did all of this while carrying Jackson's baby and telling me you supported my relationship with him. I paused, making sure she could see the complete absence of forgiveness in my eyes. That baby deserves better than you as a mother. Madison's face crumpled, but I wasn't done. Also, I added, standing back up so everyone could hear. Agent Parrish has evidence that Madison used her pharmaceutical access to drug at least 6 different people over the past year, including 2 federal witnesses in unrelated cases. So she's looking at federal drug trafficking charges on top of everything else. Agent Parrish nodded grimly. Ms. Pierce will be transferred to federal custody after medical evaluation. Given her pregnancy, she'll be held in a facility equipped for expectant mothers. As they led the last of the conspirators away in handcuffs, I looked out at my wedding guests. 450 people who had come to celebrate my marriage were now sitting in stunned silence, having witnessed the most dramatic criminal takedown in wedding history. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's sound system, I need to change clothes. Please don't go anywhere. This story isn't over. I walked toward the vestry at the back of the altar, my wedding dress train trailing behind me like a queen's robes. But before I disappeared from view, I turned back one more time. Oh, and someone please make sure the photographer gets pictures of Jackson, Madison, and Tyler in handcuffs. I want those for my wedding album. 20 minutes later, I emerged from the vestry completely transformed. Gone was the princess wedding gown, the soft romantic hairstyle, the delicate makeup that made me look like a fairy tale bride. In their place was a sharp charcoal business suit that I had hidden in the vestry that morning, my hair pulled back in a severe bun, and makeup that made me look like exactly what I was. A surgeon who had just performed the most successful operation of her career. The congregation audibly gasped when they saw me. This wasn't the same woman who had walked down the aisle an hour ago. This was someone entirely different. Someone powerful, confident, and absolutely in control. I walked back to the altar, but this time I wasn't a bride. I was a prosecutor presenting her closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice now carrying the authority of someone who had just orchestrated the downfall of 5 criminals. Thank you for your patience during this unusual ceremony. A few people actually chuckled, which surprised me. Apparently, there's something about seeing justice served in real time that makes people appreciate dark humor. I reached into my suit jacket and pulled out the engagement ring Jackson had given me 2 years ago. A 4-carat diamond that had cost more than most people's cars, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the cathedral light like stars. I held it up so everyone could see it. This ring, I announced, cost Jackson Hayes $47,000. Money he borrowed against his family's failing business. Money that was supposed to go toward paying his employees. I walked to the side of the altar where a small donation box sat, decorated with the Children's Memorial Hospital logo, the same hospital Jackson had accused me of stealing from. I hereby donate this ring to Children's Memorial Hospital, I said, dropping the ring into the box with a satisfying clink. Let it fund the cancer research that Jackson claimed I was stealing from. The applause started slowly, with just my father clapping. Then my mother joined in. Then my siblings, my extended family, my medical colleagues, and finally the entire congregation was on their feet, giving me a standing ovation that echoed through the cathedral like thunder. When the applause died down, I wasn't finished. I have one more announcement, I said, pulling a folded paper from my jacket pocket. Earlier this week, I received word that my research proposal for a new pediatric oncology treatment protocol has been approved for a $50 million federal grant. The research will be conducted right here in New York, and it's dedicated to the memory of my brother Daniel. More applause, but I held up my hand. The best part? The research will be funded entirely by assets seized from criminal enterprises, including the money Tyler stole, the Hayes family properties that will be forfeited under RICO statutes, and the proceeds from Jackson's gambling debts that the FBI recovered from offshore accounts. I smiled, and this time it was genuine, warm, and full of the satisfaction that comes from turning tragedy into triumph. Jackson thought he could destroy my life to save his own. Instead, his crimes are going to fund research that will save children's lives for decades to come. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just justice. It's turning someone's evil into something beautiful. The cathedral erupted in applause again, but this time I just stood there and let it wash over me. For the first time in 7 days, I felt truly happy. And somewhere in federal custody, Jackson was probably just beginning to understand that he hadn't just lost a fiancée. He had underestimated a woman who turned his betrayal into the weapon that destroyed him. The federal agents had barely cleared the cathedral doors when the real chaos began. What I had just unleashed wasn't just the arrest of 5 criminals. It was the complete demolition of an entire social and financial ecosystem built on lies. Within 30 minutes of Jackson being led away in handcuffs, his phone started buzzing with calls that would never be answered. But the people calling weren't just concerned friends. They were investors, business partners, and very dangerous men who had been waiting for payments that would never come. My father approached me at the altar, still in his wedding tuxedo, but looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. "Grace, sweetheart, there's something you need to know. Hayes Development Corporation isn't just bankrupt. It's been operating as a Ponzi scheme for the past 18 months. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? I mean, Jackson wasn't just gambling away his own money. He was using new investor funds to pay back old investors while skimming millions for his personal debts. Dad's voice was grim. When the FBI seizes his assets tomorrow, they're going to find that Hayes Development owes over $40 million to people who thought they were buying legitimate real estate investments. The implications hit me like a truck. Jackson hadn't just betrayed me personally. He had been running a massive financial fraud that would destroy dozens of families. Pension funds, retirement savings, college funds. All gone because Jackson Hayes couldn't stop gambling and couldn't resist living beyond his means. But that was just the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Parrish. "Dr. Morrison, you need to see the news. Turn on Channel 7. I grabbed the remote from the wedding photographer and switched on one of the cathedral's monitors. The afternoon news was already running a breaking story. Manhattan wedding turns into FBI raid. Real estate heir arrested for multi-million-dollar fraud. But the reporter wasn't just covering the arrests. She was standing outside Ascendia Pharmaceuticals, Madison's employer, where federal agents were loading boxes of evidence into trucks. Sources tell us that Madison Pierce, a pharmaceutical sales executive arrested today for conspiracy and drug trafficking, may have been stealing controlled substances for over 2 years, the reporter announced. The DEA is now investigating whether Ms. Pierce was supplying drugs to illegal gambling operations in exchange for debt forgiveness for her boyfriend, Jackson Hayes. My blood ran cold. Madison hadn't just been stealing pills for personal use or to drug people for information. She had been trading pharmaceutical drugs to cover Jackson's gambling debts. The scope of their criminal enterprise was so much bigger than I had imagined. The news switched to footage of Tyler being led away from our family's investment office in handcuffs. The reporter's voice continued over the images. Tyler Morrison, a senior associate at Morrison & Associates, allegedly embezzled over $500,000 from a children's medical scholarship fund. But sources close to the investigation suggest the Uncle Richard appeared beside me, his face ashen. "Grace, we need to talk privately." Tyler had access to more than just the foundation accounts. 20 minutes later, in the cathedral's private meeting room, Uncle Richard laid out a financial nightmare that made my head spin. Tyler hadn't just stolen from one charity. Over the past 2 years, he had been systematically skimming from dozens of client accounts, always just small enough amounts to avoid triggering automatic audits. "We're looking at potential losses of over $3 million, Uncle Richard said, his hands shaking as he showed me preliminary forensic accounting reports. Client trust accounts, estate funds, investment portfolios. Tyler had his fingers in everything. "How is that possible?" I asked, though I was starting to understand the scope of Tyler's access within our family firm. "Because we trusted him. He's family. We gave him permissions and access that we should have reserved for partners only." Uncle Richard looked like he wanted to be sick. "Morrison & Associates might not survive this, Grace. For generations of family business, and Tyler destroyed it all for Jackson Hayes." But even as I absorbed the magnitude of Tyler's betrayal, my phone was exploding with calls and texts from people I hadn't heard from in months. The first few were from society friends offering support. But then the messages took a darker turn. "Grace, it's Charlotte Pemberton. I need to talk to you about Jackson. There are things you need to know." Charlotte Pemberton, Jackson's ex-girlfriend from college, now a successful attorney in Boston. We'd met a few times at charity events, and she'd always been politely distant. I called her back immediately. "Grace, I'm so sorry you had to go through this publicly, but I'm not surprised," Charlotte said without preamble. "Jackson tried to pull the same scheme on me 3 years ago." "What do you mean?" "The gambling debts, the fake financial documents, even trying to get me to invest in his real estate deals. When I started asking too many questions, he tried to convince my family that I was having a mental breakdown. He had medical records forged showing I was being treated for bipolar disorder." My hands were shaking as I held the phone. "Charlotte, did you report this to anyone?" "I tried, but Jackson's family has connections everywhere." My complaints were buried, dismissed as the ravings of an unstable ex-girlfriend. "But Grace, you're not his first victim. There were at least 2 other women before you." Before I could fully process Charlotte's revelation, Dr. Amanda Walsh, Chief of Staff at Children's Memorial Hospital, appeared in the meeting room doorway. "Grace, I hate to interrupt, but we need to address something immediately." Dr. Walsh looked grim. "Jackson's accusations today, even though they were false, have triggered an automatic investigation by the medical board. Your hospital privileges are suspended pending a full financial audit." The words hit like a physical blow. Suspended. Even though I was completely innocent, even though I was the victim, my career was now in jeopardy because of Jackson's lies. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Could be weeks, could be months. The board has to investigate every allegation thoroughly, even fabricated ones." Dr. Walsh sat down across from me. "But Grace, there's something else. Something that might actually work in your favor." She pulled out her tablet and showed me an email chain. "Jackson's mother Eleanor has been on our board of directors for 5 years. She had access to detailed financial information about hospital operations, donor lists, and charity fund structures." I felt my stomach drop again. "She used her board position to help Jackson create the fake evidence." "Exactly. But here's the silver lining. Eleanor's betrayal of her fiduciary duty to the hospital means we can pursue criminal charges against her beyond what the FBI is already handling. More importantly, we can demonstrate that you were targeted specifically because of your legitimate charitable contributions, not to spite them." Dr. Walsh leaned forward, and for the first time since the arrests, I saw something that looked like hope in her expression. "Grace, the board is prepared to offer you a promotion to department head once this investigation concludes. Your courage in exposing this conspiracy, your years of dedicated service, and your anonymous donations that we've now confirmed. You've proven yourself to be exactly the kind of leader this hospital needs." But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Agent Parrish appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "Dr. Morrison, I need to speak with you immediately. We've found something in Jackson's financial records that changes everything." She sat down and pulled out a thick folder. Jackson Hayes wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme. He was laundering money for organized crime families. "The gambling debts you discovered? They were actually cover for a money laundering operation that moved over $60 million through fake real estate transactions." The room went completely silent. Organized crime. Jackson hadn't just betrayed me. He had been working with actual criminals who would now see me as a threat to their operations. "Are you telling me I'm in danger?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "You and your family are being placed in protective custody until we can determine the extent of the threat," Agent Parrish said. "Jackson's arrest today didn't just expose a wedding day betrayal. It exposed a criminal network that has been operating for years, and you're the witness who brought it all down." As if on cue, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Agent Parrish gestured for me to answer while she activated a recording device. "Dr. Morrison?" The voice was unfamiliar, with a slight Brooklyn accent that made my skin crawl. "You made some very powerful people very unhappy today. Jackson owed us a lot of money, and now he can't pay. That makes his debts your problem." Agent Parrish was already signaling to other agents in the hallway. "Sir, I think you should know that this call is being recorded by federal agents, and threatening a federal witness is a crime that carries a 20-year prison sentence." The line went dead immediately. "Pack a bag," Agent Parrish said grimly. "You're staying in a federal safe house until we can neutralize this threat. Jackson's betrayal just put you in the crosshairs of people who make him look like a choir boy." As I sat in that cathedral meeting room, still wearing my business suit, surrounded by federal agents and family members trying to process the magnitude of what we'd uncovered, I realized something that both terrified and empowered me. Jackson's plan to destroy my life hadn't just failed. It had exposed a criminal conspiracy so vast that taking him down might be the most important thing I'd ever done. Not just for me, but for every person these criminals had victimized or planned to victimize in the future. The wedding was over, but the real fight was just beginning. For years later, I stood in the gleaming new Daniel Morrison Pediatric Cancer Research Wing at Children's Memorial Hospital, watching a 7-year-old boy named Marcus take his first steps after successful treatment with a protocol my research team had developed. The $127,000 that was supposed to pay for my wedding reception? Every penny had been redirected to fund the initial research that led to this breakthrough. Dr. Morrison, the Today Show is ready for your interview. My assistant Sarah called from the hallway. In 30 minutes, I'd be live on national television discussing my new book, Betrayed into Strength: How My Wedding Day Nightmare Became My Life's Purpose. The book had hit the New York Times bestseller list within 2 weeks of publication. Not because people wanted another revenge story, but because they needed to hear how someone could transform the worst betrayal imaginable into a force for protecting others. The advance alone, $2.3 million, had funded 3 more research positions in my department. But the most satisfying transformation wasn't financial. It was personal. My relationship with my family had evolved from the superficial politeness of holiday dinners to genuine, unbreakable bonds forged in crisis. My father now called me twice a week, not because he had to, but because watching me handle betrayal with such precision had shown him a daughter he'd never fully appreciated. My mother had become my closest advisor, helping me navigate the media attention and speaking opportunities that flooded in after the arrests. Uncle Richard approached me in the research wing, carrying a folder that I recognized immediately. Morrison and Associates had not only survived Tyler's embezzlement, it had thrived. After the FBI recovered the stolen funds and Tyler's conviction made headlines, new clients had flocked to us, drawn by our transparency in handling the crisis and our commitment to accountability. "Grace, I have news about the final restitution payments," Uncle Richard said, his voice carrying a satisfaction I'd rarely heard before. Jackson's assets were liquidated yesterday. After paying back his fraud victims, there's still $3.7 million left over. Let me guess. It's going to the Children's Foundation? He smiled. Per the court order you requested, yes. Jackson's criminal empire will fund medical scholarships for the next 15 years. Every penny he stole or borrowed or gambled away is now working to train the next generation of pediatric specialists. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Jackson had tried to destroy me by claiming I stole from sick children. Now his own crimes were literally saving children's lives through the doctors his restitution would train. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Michael Oliver, the cardiothoracic surgeon I'd been dating for 8 months. Unlike Jackson's grand romantic gestures, Michael's love was quiet, steady, and completely transparent. He'd known my entire story before our first coffee date, had actually seen the arrests covered on the news and specifically sought me out because he admired how I'd handled the crisis. "Ready for dinner? I have something important to ask you," his text read. I smiled, knowing exactly what he wanted to ask. Michael wasn't the type to surprise someone with a proposal, especially someone who'd been ambushed at an altar before. We discussed marriage extensively, planned it together, even looked at rings together. When Michael proposed, probably tonight, it would be because we'd already decided together that we wanted to spend our lives as partners in every sense of the word. But first, I needed to check on the people whose lives had taken very different turns. Jackson's 4-year federal sentence had been served in minimum security, but losing everything had broken him in ways that prison couldn't. According to my contacts in the federal system, he spent most of his time in the prison library, writing letters to his victims that he was never allowed to send. His parents' estate had been seized under RICO forfeiture, and Eleanor and Robert were serving their own sentences in separate facilities. The Hayes family name, once synonymous with Manhattan real estate power, was now a cautionary tale taught in business ethics classes. Madison's story was more complex. Her 2-year sentence for drug trafficking and conspiracy had been served in a facility for pregnant inmates, and she'd given birth to a daughter while incarcerated. After her release, she'd lost her pharmaceutical license permanently and was working as a medical transcriptionist, while raising her daughter alone. Jackson had signed away all parental rights from prison, wanting nothing to do with the child who represented his crimes. The saddest part? Madison had tried to contact me 3 times since her release, wanting to apologize and make things right. I'd refused to see her. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, and some people prove through their actions that they can't be trusted with second chances. Tyler's 3-year sentence had actually been the most transformative of all the punishments. Prison had forced him to confront his gambling addiction, his entitlement, and the devastating impact of his choices on our family legacy. He'd completed every rehabilitation program available and had written me letters, which I did read, showing genuine remorse and understanding of what he'd destroyed. When Tyler was released next month, Uncle Richard had arranged for him to work in our firm's mailroom at minimum wage. Not out of family obligation, but because Tyler's letters demonstrated real change, and our company believed in second chances for people who'd earned them through genuine transformation. He'd never handle client money again, but he might eventually rebuild some version of a meaningful life. Standing in that hospital wing, surrounded by the tangible results of turning betrayal into purpose, I felt something I'd never expected to feel about my wedding day: gratitude. Without Jackson's betrayal, I would never have discovered my capacity for strategic thinking under immense pressure from betrayal. Without Madison's conspiracy, I would never have learned that I was strong enough to destroy people who tried to destroy me. Without Tyler's theft, our family business would never have implemented the oversight systems that made us stronger and more trustworthy than we'd ever been before. My phone rang with a call from Agent Parrish, who'd become not just a law enforcement contact, but a genuine friend over the years. "Grace, I wanted to give you the final numbers on the organized crime takedown," she said without preamble. Jackson's money laundering evidence led to 47 additional arrests across 6 states. We dismantled 3 separate criminal enterprises, recovered over $200 million in stolen assets, and prevented crimes that would have victimized hundreds of innocent people. The scope still amazed me. My personal betrayal had exposed a network of criminals who'd been operating for decades. "There's something else," Agent Parrish continued. "The Justice Department wants to offer you a consulting position. Part-time, flexible around your medical career, helping us identify and investigate financial crimes targeting charitable organizations and vulnerable individuals." I didn't hesitate. Yes. Because that's what this experience had taught me. When someone tries to destroy you, the most powerful response isn't just survival. It's transformation into someone who prevents others from suffering the same attacks. 6 months later, I stood at the altar of a small chapel in my parents' garden, wearing a simple white dress that cost $300, and looking into the eyes of a man who'd known my worst story, and chosen to love me anyway. Michael's proposal had been everything I'd never known I wanted. Quiet, private, and built on a foundation of complete honesty about who we both were, and what we both needed. Our wedding had 12 guests. No photographers except my cousin with her iPhone. No dramatic vows or elaborate ceremonies. Just 2 people who'd found each other after learning that real love isn't about grand gestures. It's about choosing someone who sees your scars and calls them beautiful. As Michael slipped a simple platinum band on my finger, I thought about the woman who'd stood in a cathedral 4 years ago, believing that love meant trust without verification, faith without evidence, vulnerability without protection. That woman had been naive, but she'd also been brave enough to refuse destruction when it came for her. Some love stories begin with "I do," I whispered to Michael as we kissed for the first time as husband and wife. Mine began with, "I won't let you destroy me." The transformation was complete. Jackson had tried to turn my greatest strength, my dedication to helping others, into the weapon that would destroy me. Instead, his betrayal had taught me to weaponize that same strength against people who prey on trust and kindness. Today, I run the largest pediatric cancer research program on the East Coast. I consult with the FBI on financial crimes targeting charities. I speak at conferences helping fraud victims find their voices and their strength. I've written a best-selling book that's helped thousands of people recognize and escape manipulative relationships. But most importantly, I learned that sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you is actually the best thing that ever happens to you. If you're strong enough to transform betrayal into purpose, pain into power, and victimization into victory, Jackson thought he was ending my story that day in the cathedral. He had no idea he was just helping me write a better beginning.